What's up, everyone? Thanks so much for stopping by and checking out my channel. Today we're playing Historic Brawl on Magic Arena. For those of you who aren't aware, Historic Brawl is a singleton format with 100 card decks. One of those cards being your commander decides what color or colors your deck is going to be in, and in most cases your commander also defines the style or strategy your deck is going to be trying to implement. Today my commander is going to be Teferi Time Raveler. Teferi has been altered from its original mana cost of 3 up to 4, 2 colorless, a blue and a white. His +1 says, until your next turn you may cast sorcery spells as though they have flash. His -3 says, return up to 1 target artifact, creature, or enchantment to its owner's hand, draw a card. He also has a passive ability that says, your opponents can't cast spells during your turn. So, I was reading this card and I thought to myself, he would make a perfect commander for an AZORIUS STAX deck. STAX decks are usually control-y, prison type decks that aim to restrict your opponent's ability to play spells and keep permanents in play. And in my opinion, Teferi Time Raveler does exactly that. We're backing this strategy up by playing tons of other permanents that have restrictive or taxing static abilities, such as Authority of the Councils, Esper Sentinel, Containment Priest, Narset Parter of the Veils, Smothering Tithe, Curse of Surveillance, the God Pharaoh Statue, and that's just naming a few. We're also adding in traditional control spells to help maintain a clean board state and generate card advantage while we are taxing our opponents to death. So we've got counter spells, we've got board wipes, we've got tons of draw spells. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get into a game. Alright, so it looks like we are going up against Kinnan Bonder Prodigy. Known for comboing and ramping, Kinnan reads, whenever you tap a non-land permanent for mana, add 1 mana of any type that permanent produced. Then he has an activated ability for 5 colorless and a blue and a green that says, look at the top 5 cards of your library. You may put a non-human creature card from among them onto the battlefield. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in any order. So my opponent is going to be looking to play a bunch of mana dorks, double their mana, and cheat big creatures into play, or combo off in some mana intensive way. So let's see what we can do against this kind of strategy. Knowing what to expect from my opponent, my first hand looks a little slow. No real way to tax them from doing anything, and no early way to interact with their expected mana dorks. So I decided to take advantage of the free mulligan brawl offers and ship this one back to look for a better hand. This second hand looked much better. I have a few tax pieces with Damping Sphere, Strict Proctor, and Kasmina, and a mana rock that will sort of help me keep up with my opponent's ramping and also give me the white mana my hand is missing. I can't really ask for much more, so I decided to keep this one. My opponent and I take a couple turns playing lands and passing before I cast my first spell, Damping Sphere. This artifact reads, if a land is tapped for 2 or more mana, it produces colorless instead of any other type or amount, and each spell a player casts costs 1 more to cast for each other spell that player has cast this turn. So, it's not going to stop Kinnan's mana dorks from producing extra mana, but it will stop my opponent from being able to play a bunch of cheap ramp spells or mana dorks all in the same turn if that's what their hand looks like. Keep that second ability of Damping Sphere in your mind because I'll definitely try to cast 2 spells in the same turn later and forget about that ability. These next couple of turns end up being pretty standard. My opponent casts a mana dork and I play out my mana rock. We are both setting up our boards and getting ready to start casting our more impactful spells. My opponent then continues the ramp with a Celestis, making it daytime on board, which makes me pretty happy because I'm now able to deploy Teferi, bounce their only creature on board, and draw a card. I do just that and pick up an AZORIUS call off the draw from Teferi, which makes me hope I'll be able to make a couple 4/4 angels later on in the game to help close things out. My opponent is sticking to the ramping game plan with an Uro Titan of Nature's Wrath and then joins me in casting their commander. So now it's time for me to play another STAX piece that was in my opening hand, Kasmina Enigmatic Mentor. Her passive makes spells my opponents cast that target a creature or planeswalker I control cost 2 additional mana to cast. Then she has a minus ability that makes a 2/2 wizard and allows me to draw a card and discard a card. So with Damping Sphere, Teferi's passive ability, and Kasmina's passive ability, we are up to 3 restricted pieces on board. We are heading in the right direction for making it pretty difficult for our opponent to play Magic the way they'd like to. I'll go ahead and make a wizard to serve as a blocker for Kinnan, and then I'm going to plus Teferi to add a little bit of extra loyalty and pass the turn. All my opponent's ramping has finally led to a payoff. Vorinclex, Voice of Hunger. This Phyrexian Praetor has Trample and says whenever you tap a land for mana, add 1 mana to your pool of any type that land produced, and a second ability that says whenever an opponent taps a land for mana, that land doesn't untap during its controller's next untap step. So if this beast stays on board, my opponent is going to be making a ton of extra mana and taxing my lands. I guess you reap what you sow, but luckily I think I have a temporary plan for this board state. After a little bit of looting and a lot more tanking, I found the line of minusing Teferi on Vorinclex to bounce and draw a card, then recasting Teferi for a fresh loyalty count to minus again on Kinnan to bounce and draw another card. I now have 2 wizards, 2 planeswalkers, and 7 cards in hand, facing down my opponent's empty board but threatening hand. My opponent recast the Vorinclex, so it's time for another temporary solution. Teferi, Hero of Dominaria. This is one of my favorite planeswalkers of all time. The +1 says, draw a card, and at the beginning of the next end step, untap 2 lands. He has a -3 that lets you tuck a non-land permanent into its owner's library, 3rd from the top, and an ultimate that's -8 and gives you an emblem with whenever you draw a card, exile target permanent an opponent controls. So for now, the Vorinclex will sit tucked away in my opponent's library while I hope to really grind some value out of this Teferi in the coming turns. I go ahead and plus my Teferi Time Raveler to give him a loyalty buff. I foretell a Behold the Multiverse and then attack with my wizards and then pass the turn. The Kinnan gets redeployed and then my opponent puts out another huge threat. Jin-Gitaxias Progress Tyrant, another must-answer Praetor with a lot of relevant text. This card says whenever you cast an artifact, instant, or sorcery spell, copy that spell. You may choose new targets for the copy. And he has a second ability that says whenever an opponent casts an artifact, instant, or sorcery spell, counter that spell. This ability triggers only once each turn. So the opponent has found their own way of taxing me again. Man, I've really been hit with the Uno Reverse card this game. So it looks like it's back to the bounce house for this one. So after bouncing the Jin-Jitaxis, I play out an anointed peacekeeper naming, you guessed it, Jin-Jitaxis, hoping it makes it just a little harder for my opponent to double spell me next turn while my commander is in play. My opponent does get to double spell with a mana dork and a must answer Elder Gargaroth, but I'm not super worried because once again I'm just going to play out Teferi Time Raveler and bounce the Gargaroth. I'm setting this up so I can get as much value off the farewell in my hand as possible. I end up having 8 cards in hand at the end of turn and discard a Brainstorm after attacking with a Wizard. So after seeing a Vorinclex and an Elder Gargaroth come back to the board, I know that now's the time for this farewell, but I've been trying to squeeze every little bit of value out of it as possible. So I plus my Teferi Time Raveler to let me cast sorceries at instant speed, hoping to snag at least one more creature with this farewell next turn. Then I plus Teferi Hero of Dominaria to draw a card, and I end up picking up a Smothering Tithe. Smothering Tithe is one of the best new pieces to STAX strategy. It's a 4 mana enchantment that says whenever an opponent draws a card, that player may pay 2 mana. If the player doesn't, you create a treasure token. So after doing the math to make sure I can cast this and still hold up farewell, I play it, putting us up to 4 stack pieces onto the board. Would you like to pay the 2? So I realize I can't let this Jin-Jitaxis resolve because then my farewell will get countered. So with it on the stack, I decide to cast the farewell. And to my surprise, my opponent decides to activate Kinnan, looking for a creature to put onto the battlefield. Luckily, they don't hit anything that gives them protection or hexproof from being exiled, and I do end up getting to snag an extra creature, so it all worked out in my favor. Would you like to pay the 2? Would you like to pay the 2? So at this point, this game is starting to feel kind of locked up in my favor. My opponent recasts their Kinnan and another mana dorky creature, and then digs for their Gingid Haxus. I cast my Behold the Multiverse and found my first hard answer to one of these big creatures in Elspeth Conquers Death, and luckily, it gets around Gingid Haxus' static ability because it is an enchantment, so I can let this Gingid Haxus resolve and then end up exiling it later with the enchantment, and it won't get countered. I play out a few more creatures, both of which have STAX abilities, putting us to 6 restrictive pieces on the board at one time. And I also get got by my own Damping Sphere, forgetting that each spell I cast ups the mana cost of my spells by 1. So I decide to activate my Planeswalkers and pass the turn back to my opponent. Would you like to pay the 2? I was expecting this game to go on a little longer and be a little more grindy, but my opponent had enough after the Elspeth Conquers Death and decides to scoop it up. So, that's the end of this game, and if you made it this far, thank you so much for hanging out with me. If you enjoyed this stack style deck, feel free to copy it, feel free to innovate it, try it out on your own. Let me know what I did wrong in my build, if I did any misplays, what you would have done differently, anything. Just leave a comment, any suggestions you have with the styling of this video or the format. I'm trying something new here, so let me know how it went. And again, thank you guys so much for hanging out. Peace.